We were looking at financial markets where we started off talking about the case where the only bank in the economy is the central bank and there are no private banks. We looked at financial market equilibrium in this case mathematically and graphically. We looked at some economic experiments where we looked at an increase in money supply and an increase in nominal income. Then we said there are two issues that we need to look at before we move forward to case two. The first issue was choosing the money supply or choosing the interest rate. We talked about what's the policy instrument for the central bank. The second issue we want to look at is the liquidity trap, also called the zero lower bound problem. Now, so far we have talked about how the central bank can always affect the interest rate by changing the money supply. If it increases the money supply, it can lower the interest rate, right? If it reduces the money supply, it can increase the interest rate. However, there's a limit to what the central bank can do. It cannot decrease the interest rate below zero. This is a constraint which is known as the zero lower bound. We want to first talk about why are negative interest rates not possible. Now, the reason is that people always have the alternative of keeping the wealth in the form of money. Remember, we're assuming there are two financial assets in which you can keep your wealth, money, and bonds. So people always have the alternative of keeping the wealth in the form of money, and we know money offers a zero interest rate. So nobody would ever buy a bond that yields a negative interest rate because holding money would be a better alternative, as money now just doesn't have the advantage of being the most liquid asset in the economy, but then it pays a higher return than bonds. If money has a return of zero and bonds have a negative return, then nobody would want to hold bonds. You'd rather just keep your wealth in the form of money. Because if you go back to the very beginning, here we talked about money can be used for transactions, but it pays zero interest rate. And when we talked about bonds, we said bonds cannot directly be used for transactions, but they earn a positive nominal interest rate, which is the reason why someone would want to hold bonds, even though they can't be used for transactions, but they do offer a positive interest rate. But if this advantage goes away, then we have money which can be used for transactions and earns a zero interest rate, which is higher than the negative return on bonds. So nobody would want to hold bonds. Everyone would want to keep their wealth in the form of money, right? The advantage bonds had over money was they earned a positive interest rate, money earned a zero interest rate. But if bonds were to earn a negative interest rate, then money is not just the most liquid asset in the economy, but it also pays a higher return than bonds. So no one would want to hold bonds if they earned a negative return. Another way of thinking about the situation is that if interest rates are below zero, that is negative, you would be paying interest for holding bonds rather than receiving interest. So again, no one would be willing to hold bonds if the return goes below zero. Because you're not receiving interest for holding bonds, you're actually paying interest for holding bonds. So no one would want to hold them. So generally, an increase in money supply does lead to a decrease in interest rate, but once the equilibrium interest rate reaches zero, further increases in the money supply have no effect on the equilibrium interest rate. It cannot fall below zero, a constraint known as zero lower bound. At the zero lower bound, monetary policy cannot decrease the interest rate below this zero lower bound. So in this case, we say the economy is said to be in a liquidity trap where the interest rate reaches its zero lower bound.